Welcome back to the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. We have a big show for you today. We're going to talk about the much anticipated reveal of the 2024 Toyota Land Cruiser. It's back. Also joining me today, who's also back, is Associate Editor Byron Hurd. What's going on, man?
Hey, I'm happy to be here and excited to talk Land Cruiser and a little special treat for our Spend My Money contributor here. So should be a fun
It's a good one. It's a good one. Stick around for Spend My Money. So with that, let's jump right in. Although real quick, I should mention, we'll talk about the C43 and spent a little bit of time in the Honda Accord Hybrid as well, which I touched on last week, but we'll touch on that again this week. So with that, Land Cruiser, we now know everything about it. We've seen it. There's a fair amount to unpack, but it's actually, as these reveals go, it's in a way it was fairly simple. There's only like basically three trims, three models. It's a hybrid powertrain. It's retro without being just blatantly retro. Yeah. I mean, what do you think? I mean, literally crack a beer. I mean, it's a little early, but
right.
Two guys talking Land Cruiser. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a solid package to me. And as Zach was pointing out to us last night, Zach's actually on scene for the Land Cruiser reveal. So he's, I guess, literally on an airplane back right now, probably while we're talking about this. But the whole package looks really promising. And you look at the Land Cruiser. I mean, it kind of left us, during the middle of the pandemic. It was closing in on like a $90,000 MSRP. It was getting very expensive. So we're seeing kind of a push back down toward the Forerunner end of the off-road spectrum for Toyota in pricing, with a mid-50s starting price on this. It hasn't actually been finalized yet, but I mean that's very promising. You consider that's like a 40-ish% drop in entry-level pricing for this vehicle, which is not something we've been seeing a lot of over the last couple of years. But we'll see. It's a little bit smaller than the Lexus GX, but not a whole lot smaller. It's concentrated on being a 5-seater, not worried about that third row bonus. So there's a lot that goes into GX that you don't get in the Land Cruiser, but you're also not paying for it. So you don't get the bigger engines. There's not the big 6-cylinder based hybrid system that's supposed to be coming for the GX later. At least we assume it's based on the 6-cylinder. It could actually end up being the same hybrid powertrain for all we know, but we know there is a hybrid powertrain coming for the Lexus too. So there are a lot of crossover here, but obviously the price difference is really what sells it here, and you're getting a lot of the capability that you usually have to spring for a TRD type model to get baked into Land Cruiser, because it comes with the four-wheel drive system and the locking rear differential standard on the base model. So you're getting the components that most people tend to reach for in an off-roader right off the bat. You don't have to, worry about like, oh, well, I'm only going to be able to get it in green with black wheels and for 1 year in a combination that I actually like. Nope, this is just what you get with the car from the get-go, and it looks great. I mean, it just, Toyota design is killing it lately. It's really promising.
So I would give it, I think probably like a B plus. When I saw it, I like it, just to be clear. I really like it. I like how they went with kind of the sort of 80s vibe. I think they also did a really good job of steering into the idea of a Land Cruiser rather than trying to make a carbon copy of any one specific generation. So in that sense, I think they crushed it. I will say this may be a bit of a hot take. I don't know. It reminds me a little bit of the approach the Defender had, where it was just a little blander than maybe we were expecting. And bland probably isn't necessarily the right word. I'll wait to reserve final judgment till I see it in person and, of course, drive it. But, yeah, I mean, to me, the Defender and a little bit like, we'll say, the Land Cruiser, they didn't go quite as over the top as, say, Bronco and Wrangler have done. And I don't say that's a missed opportunity because it looks great, but that was the initial impression. Like, oh, okay. They played it perhaps safe isn't the right word, because there's some very impressive, stylish, cues out here in design. But I would put it more in right now the Defender camp of like, yeah, I like it, but I don't know. I tend to think Bronco and Wrangler might, maybe even Forerunner, depending on how that shakes out, might still be more or less my flavor of brandy. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, and
I was going to say this, square or round headlights. Do you have a preference?
That's exactly what I was going to dive into. Okay. I like the idea of them doing them both. We were talking about this last night during the actual reveal. The headlights the round headlights, I think, look better when the headlights are actually illuminated, like when you can see it. And they look a little bit better on the higher trim where you see the body color matching bumper insert there in the front. Over the black trim, I think the round headlights look a little goofy, so that's going to be on the 1958 and the the very base model essentially. And the rectangular headlights look good with the full color body trim, and I think since you don't get them in any other like combination, that's probably the cleanest look for me because it looks, it's less like here's a nod to the retro version with the round headlights. This is really what we intended, and it also is kind of a little bit of a callback to that electric mini cruiser concept that they showed us like 2 years ago, very, very briefly. In fact, the styling is virtually identical. They basically showed us what the Land Cruiser was going to look like 2 years ago. And we'll include a link to this in the post along with the podcast. So you guys can check it out. But the idea is that, they basically just took this little like compact cruiser electric thing and they stretch it just enough wheelbase to get a Land Cruiser out of it. They look virtually identical, which also makes me wonder what's going to happen with 4Runner. Like, is this compact cruiser electric going to be the new 4Runner? Because now with the Land Cruiser being cheaper, it's kind of putting some pressure downward on 4Runner, which is already still kind of premium in that it's, a body on frame off-roading SUV kind of sandwiched in with a bunch of SUVs that it competes with that aren't really meant to be off-road, with the exception of like Grand Cherokee, which again pushes more toward Land Cruiser type pricing than it does toward 4Runner type pricing. So we've kind of got this gap down at the bottom, Toyota electrifying, like, is the replacement down at the bottom end going to be another gasoline powered or even hybrid 4Runner, or is it going to end up being a new electric kind of white space product? So interesting potential product dynamic there.
Yeah, you definitely started the conspiracy theories at our morning Slack conversation this morning. That was a big question I had yesterday as I was kind of going over the press materials and trying to like, parse it all out, is what does this mean for the 4Runner? Because this does get much closer in size and price to the 4Runner. But, as Zach pointed out, this is Zach Palmer, our road test guy who is on the ground in Texas doing some great reporting. Basically the 4Runner does stop, right where the Land Cruiser now picks up as far as the pricing. And so it is kind of like, a natural progression, right? So I think, that works. And then you really do have to wonder what in the world is next for the 4Runner, because it really has become something, it's aged, let's put it that way. And you wonder, how are they going to style it up? What are they going to do? To your point, all electric? I don't know. But I guess we'll see. I mean, I think the other big thing here, we talked about this initially, is the price. Like, I mean, getting this starting at the mid 50s, yes, they essentially, killed the old Land Cruiser from this kind of like, the old Land Cruiser as it existed right up until say 2021 was almost like this like old money Northeast, like, I don't know, expensive thing that you would expect to see in the LL Bean catalog, and it never went off road. The only time it probably went off road was when it was like, had like, I don't know, 150,000 miles on the odometer at that point. So to me, they really returned it to its purpose.
Yeah. Going back from essentially like a solid enthusiast used pickup to being like something you can actually like go out and buy and off-road immediately and not feel like you're throwing money away.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. It's really, I think it lived up to the hype. I think that's not trying to put too fine a point on this. I think it lived up to the hype. I'll be interested to see as the, like, sort of the next couple of years evolve here, how they will evolve the Land Cruiser. Historically, it's not been a vehicle that changed very much. It's a very rich competitive field right now. We've got Land Cruiser, Defender, Bronco, Wrangler, 4Runner. What am I leaving out? I mean, there's just so many things in this field right now, and there's a big market for it. So,
yeah, and it really kind of calls into question Nissan's decision to let the Xterra brand completely disappear from its portfolio. Like, they had a really solid entry in this market that they just kind of let wither and die, like they did a lot of products, honestly, in the early mid 2000s. So it's kind of sad to see that we've got this wide open field again, and Nissan's not even bothered to be present in it.
and Nissan does have the heritage to jump in there and do some stuff. Let's put it that way. And I think a lot of us would like to see that because, it's there. It's an opportunity for the taking. So, all right, well, check out our full coverage. We have a million galleries, a couple of stories, more stories on the way. Zach actually got to tour a Land Cruiser museum. It's pretty great. You got to check out some of those pictures. Tons of video. If you're listening to this on, say it's the weekend and you're on your patio, this is a great time to go back, check out all our coverage this week here on Autoblog. So, all right. So on the business side of the world, 7 OEMs have sort of banded together to basically create this like charging network sort of thing. Part of me wonders just how much of a hedge this is against like the Tesla world, if you will. It certainly made a lot of waves last week in the electric vehicle community. And ultimately, I think the details are kind of vague initially, but ultimately this could be good for consumers. So, I think it'll be, the other thing too is how they're going to work together. We've seen this in the past where like multiple automakers take on like a high level mission. And it seems like that's just a lot of people trying to do stuff. So that's, cynically, I wonder how it's going to play out. So,
Yeah, I mean the OEM integration that they're promising across all the brands that are participating, and I would assume even outside that, they're branding this as kind of an open network. So the idea that possibly we're going to see other OEMs come along to join it here in the near future is certainly on the table. And you look at how many of them, we got 7 OEMs already signed on, and really the only conspicuous missing OEM from like the big main list here is Volkswagen. And it's because they have Electrify America as their own kind of responsibility. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them join this. Nissan, of course, is kind of in a weird spot because they're kind of stuck in between charging standards at the moment. So I think if we see Volkswagen and maybe Nissan kind of migrate toward this, we can pretty much call it universal instead of just, open. So the idea that they seem to want more people to join, more OEMs to join. I mean, sure, they'd like to spread the cost around, right? It looks like it's viable, and I mean, it doesn't hurt to have a standard. Even Tesla people aren't really going to like it because it means they're going to be sharing the space that was originally theirs with other people, and the other people aren't going to like it because they're going to have to share space with Tesla, right? Like there's going to be kind of a rivalry thing there with the EV brands for who knows how long. But I mean, it's a win for consumers, like you said, because it creates potential, if nothing else, for future development in a space where we really need it. Because charging infrastructure is still in a lot of trouble, and the more we scale it, the more likely we are to find solutions that work for situations that aren't easy to charge right now. Your apartment complexes, condo units, things like that. Situations where it's harder to install your own infrastructure because you're really kind of relying on a landlord or some other entity to do it for you.
7 OEMs, we're talking 30,000 stations plus stations. This is both NACS and CCS. So it really sounds like the best of all worlds. But again, very interesting to see how this plays out. Let's put it that way. It could make it should make things better, if you will. We're looking at a 2024 timeline, I believe. But as usual, that takes, that's like the beginning. Then there's like a ramp up period, and yeah, it's going to be interesting. Let's put it that way. It's, to your point, there appears to be a rivalry developing in the infrastructure network.
Yeah, it's a weird setup, but I think Ford and GM definitely kind of set this all off by agreeing to go down the same road as Tesla with NACS. So, like from that point, it was really kind of inevitable that something like this was going to happen, especially because Tesla wanted to make sure they were qualifying for subsidies for charging infrastructure, because if they weren't making it public, making it open, at least available to other people, then all of that was in jeopardy. And of course, you don't want to, first of all, miss out on all that free government money. And second of all, close off people who might become exposed to the brand and then want it. In a way, this might actually end up being kind of advertising for Tesla, because, even if the open network ends up doing well, people come along and say, well, I mean, I can also still charge at a Tesla charging station because all these things have combined now. Like, I don't have to go to the open network. I can go to a supercharger. If they decide that the Tesla experience is better, or they wish their experience and their EV was more like a Tesla, it's another competitive advantage for them. So
It's interesting Ford is not a part of this. You've got General Motors and Stellantis, and then you've got the Germans, and you've got the Koreans. You've got a wide range, quite the cross-section of automakers here. Honda's in there. It's just, for everybody knows, it's BMW, GM, Honda, Hyundai, Kia, Mercedes, and Stellantis. So to your point, Volkswagen's not part of the party. Toyota is not in there, which, they don't really have any electric cars. So, what do you need to charge them for? But you might want to get on the grid, ahead of time. Could be a thought there. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of politics, backroom maneuvering, and stuff going on. Let's put it that way with the charging network. All right, so this is just a fun one. The new Mini Dash is pretty awesome. This reminds me a little bit of back in the day when there was the open meter, when it would tell you how long the convertible was, your roof was down in your Mini Cooper. I love this. This is awesome.
Yeah, it's very on brand for Mini. It's very cute. It's very, extra, which I mean that's been their formula from the beginning. And it reminds me a little bit of what Ford's doing in the new Mustang with all the, like, you can do like the Fox body gauges, you can do stuff so like it's nice to see technology that actually does something cool for once. It doesn't just, replace something useful.
Yeah, I agree. In Mini, nobody's better at that than Mini. Let's put it that way. All right. So you've been rolling around in a C43. That's pretty awesome. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so this is the first time we've actually got a chance to sample the C43 for the new generation. And so this is the new turbo 4-cylinder and hybrid, which, I mean, we're using hybrid kind of loosely here. I mean, the hybrid component of it is essentially electric in that it powers an electric supercharger that keeps the turbo in boost more. So it's a performance additive. It's not really an efficiency maneuver, although I guess it can actually improve fuel economy a bit. That's really not the point. The car is replacing a 3-liter inline-6 C43 that produced less power but more torque, as I recall. And so we're getting kind of a weird flip. Like, it could have been the same car. In fact, it weighs almost exactly the same as the inline-6 version that left. But you get 402 horsepower, which is plenty potent, and about 370 pound-feet of torque, so plenty of grunt. All-wheel drive is standard. It's a punchy little car. What I will point out, though, is the character of it feels a little strange. And if you're familiar with the A-Class AMGs, the 4-cylinder sound that you're getting from them is not what you're used to from a classic AMG. It's something that people have kind of gotten used to, but at the same time, when you really start to kind of push performance with a 4-cylinder, you're kind of putting yourself in a fairly narrow lane when it comes to exhaust note, and you end up with something that maybe doesn't sound, I'm going to say it doesn't really sound German. I'm going to say it sounds Italian. It feels like a little Fiat. It feels like a little Alpha. Like it's buzzy, but not necessarily obtrusively buzzy. It's that Italian backroads sound. I don't really know how else to explain it, but it's very, boisterous and youthful. It doesn't feel like an elegant luxury machine. It feels like a sport compact, which that's a highly audience dependent judgment, I think. Like, some people are going to say, "Oh, that sounds like fun." Other people are going to say, that's not what I want from a Mercedes-Benz. So it's a new experience. It's something that it took me just a couple drives to get used to. Even in comfort mode with everything dialed back, it's a little burpy and farty compared to what you would expect from a classic C-Class. So I loved it. I really enjoyed driving it. It's actually a blast, but I don't know how it's going to settle with the traditional Mercedes buyer.
That's a very interesting take, because the sound is, critical part of, your Mercedes, or, as you reference, like an Italian car. It does, it draws you in. It keeps you sort of engaged, if you will. My take on the C43 is that it looks much more evolved than it has in the past. Like, that grille, it seems like Mercedes is really starting to figure it out, how to make these kind of muscle sedans where they can be in your face, but not offensive in the way that, say, some of BMW's cars are with their grills and things like that. So, did you get a lot of compliments on the C43, or anybody notice it?
It did actually get some looks. Yeah, when I drove it out to film it with Amr, we included this one in the Autoblog Garage feature, so you get a walk around video on that here in the coming weeks. It was actually quite popular, just even in the parking lot. There were people driving by. A couple people parked next to us while we were trying to film it, which was kind of a pain, but they just wanted to check out the car. So yeah, it's a bit of a head turner, and I had it finished in black. It has kind of like a rose gold kind of finish on the badges, so those stand out against the black trunk lid. It actually looked really cool. It's relatively sedate too, since it's not the C63. It's not the full blown let's go hard AMG. it's a little more subtle, and so mine with the black and the black carbon accents on the exterior, like, really looked quite clean, quite good. It's honestly probably one of the better Mercedes designs of the new and upcoming generation in my eyes. Like it looks coherent, it looks good. They carried over a lot from the last C class, which I think matters design wise. And yeah, I just think I was far more impressed by it than I expected to be. I'm a little more hesitant about the C63. I am really excited to try it out just to see if it feels the same or not. I have a hunch it kind of will just be, this formula, taken to an 11 or 12. But if it's as fun to drive, then I can probably forgive some of the noises as a previous German fanboy, I guess a reformed German fanboy. Like I started my life in automotive enthusiasm in Volkswagens and with a VR6, which, one of the engines that people still love the sound of, even though you can't buy them anymore. So, coming from that and driving this car, it's just like, this is not what I remember from my childhood, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. So,
Yeah, I mean, you've reformed into owning multiple Mopar, muscle cars, a Jeep, and a Cadillac CT4 Blackwing. So that's quite the journey on your car tastes.
yeah, I've been places. So,
Oh, that's funny. All right, so we will kind of kind of put a bow a little bit on the Honda Accord Hybrid, which I drove last week. Again, we kind of went over some of my initial thoughts on it. I was riffing on this with Joel because he was supposed to drive it in New York and his plane couldn't land. He was flying into LaGuardia and he literally flew back after making it to New York. So he drove it, and then I had a load of it as well here in Michigan, and it's to me it's very interesting like setup here because you can get the Sport Hybrid, which starts at like 31. Then you've got multiple hybrids. There's actually almost more hybrid versions of the Accord. There are 4 versus 2 than just a regular Accord, such as it is. And it's basically it goes all the way up to a variety of just what kind of infotainment, how much leather do you want, all that stuff. And the touring, I think, is still pretty reasonable at like 37. So, to me, it's like, I think, first of all, the hybrid is the one to get. And I think Honda would tell you that too, because again, like 2/3 of the offerings are hybrids. So they're kind of shaping their sales strategy here. Um, it reminded me, a couple things. It reminded me just how much it's fun to drive a good sedan. It's not really something that I think a lot of people do anymore. And it's not something, even in like our jobs, we get a lot of really good sedans. And this one is a very solid sedan. It's a hybrid, but handles pretty well, steered pretty well. This one, I said this last week, but I think it bears repeating. I think they kind of watered down the design a little bit. I don't necessarily like that. Upon reflection, I can see some of the better attributes of it. Like the taillights were something I was ragging on. Yeah, they look pretty good. In a vacuum, this is a handsome car. But it does feel like that last version of the Accord, really, I thought they just nailed it. And then this is just a little, you see a little bit of the old Chevy Malibu in there. You see a little bit of the like Tesla, which a lot of people would say is a good thing. They kind of, I will say this, you got to change your cars. You can't stand still. This isn't the Wrangler, but there's that. Trunk was huge. Back seat was highly functional. Got a car seat back there. Everybody was very comfortable. The leather, I think it was leather-ish material felt very good. I spilled some coffee on it. It cleaned up right away. All that good stuff. Still not thrilled with the Honda infotainment system. I've been kind of ragging on it, especially in Acuras where they had that kind of mouse thing. This is fine. You can use it, but it does take, it literally took me a couple days to figure it out, to get like very comfortable with it. And, whatever. If you're an owner of this car, you'll figure it out pretty quick. But it reached the point of annoyance for me. So,
yeah, and to your point about it being a hybrid and where Honda's kind of gone with dynamics with the Accord, you look at, their history with the Accord Hybrid started off as performance based. They wanted it to be a, V6 based performance adder. They wanted to have fun with it. And that kind of got muddled over the years, mostly because the customer response didn't really exist. People were like, oh, that's cute. Okay. and never bought it. And so it has morphed into an efficiency-based system, but it's still supposed to be fun. And the Accord chassis has always been reliably good, and it's nice to see that they still care about that kind of thing. And that it's kind of interesting now, like all the automakers who have sedans have kind of decided like, oh, well, those are the fun cars now. Whether they were before or not, they are the funnest thing you can buy from most of these manufacturers, since nobody makes a coupe anywhere. So it's nice that people have kind of just like, well, you know what? If we're gonna keep selling sedans, the people who like sedans like these qualities, we're gonna lean into it, and it's working out for us because most of the sedans that are being produced are actually worth driving. So
Yeah, that's a really good point. Is if you get into one, and the rare occasion you get into like this almost extinct model, it's pretty good. So, and then one other note on the powertrain here: it's 204 horsepower. That's the electric hybrid powertrain. The hybrid powertrain with the Accord. That's a little, it's a little juicier than the 192 output that you would get in the just the base turbo. So it's, again, I've driven that engine before, but not in this car, obviously. And it was a little spunky, you get a little bit of that like electric juice when you like kind of nail the throttle, and just all the stuff you get in a hybrid car that makes you think, oh yeah, this is fun. So it's, sometimes it becomes too like, can you get one? What's going to be on the dealer's lot? But if you can get the hybrid version, that's what I would do. So, all right. That takes us all the way to Spend My Money. This is a good one. Jesse in Sarasota, Florida writes, a few years ago, I asked you to spend my money and choose a BMW 330i, custom ordered with all the performance and tech bits. Been my favorite car to date, more so than 2 prior 5 Series, okay? But the lease will be up in January, and now I'm back to obsessing. I mostly drive around town with the occasional trips back and forth across Florida. Design and build quality matter as much as performance. He says no Teslas, okay? I'd like to stay under $80,000. Options so far: BMW M340i. Some things about the 3 Series LCI bother me, but stepping up to the inline 6 could forgive those sins. All right. BMW i4 xDrive 40. It's familiar enough with great technology. Just not a fan of the front end styling. Yeah, it's probably true. Will it feel too heavy compared to the petrol 3 Series? Okay. Polestar 2 rear-wheel drive as an architect. I love the recliner minimalist, I love the minimalist styling and the range updates for 2024, and this makes it a contender. Is it as rewarding to drive as the i4? C43 seems more, speaking of C43, it seems more sophisticated than the 3 Series now, but it's hard to get past a complex 4-cylinder returning worse fuel economy compared to the M340i. Yeah, fair. Lease versus buy rates may factor in. With high rates, I don't mind paying cash for a nice car, but I would only lease an EV since the solid-state battery that is supposedly on the horizon will tank their values. What would you do? One last petrol performance sedan before they're all gonzo? Dive into the EV world, abandon my Euro snobbery, and consider other options. Thank you, gentlemen. I've enjoyed the Autoblog Podcast for years now. Keep up the great banter, if you will, writes Jesse in Sarasota, Florida. Great question. Hope I did it justice there. Byron, I will kick it over to you.
I like Jesse. Jesse's got a good attitude. I have driven most of these. I've driven everything but the Polestar 2, in fact. And Greg, I believe you have driven the Polestar 2? Excellent. We're going to cover all the bases here. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and tell you that you're probably, of the ones I've driven, going to like the M340i the best. I don't think you will enjoy the character of the C43, though I would encourage you to drive it because it is a ton of fun. So you should give it a shot. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. It's absolutely worth sampling, not going to steer you away. But if you prefer the inline 6, if you like that feel of like a big smooth lump under the hood, then you're not going to appreciate the C43's power delivery. It's punchy and peaky and not quite as refined as what you're probably looking for. Dynamics-wise, though, it's a blast. And with the M340i, the only thing I would steer you away from is any of the like carbon seat upgrades and that silly little lump in the seat. Looks great, not practical at all for your long trips across Florida. I would avoid that like the plague. Apart from that, the i4 is great. You will feel the weight in the braking. The corners, not so much. Tire technologies come so far that you don't really feel it unless you're really, really pushing it in terms of like cornering dynamics. But when you get on those brakes, you will feel that pedal will feel so much longer than what you're used to in an ICE car. You'll get used to it after a while. It'll just be something you're kind of like you've baked into your standard like muscle memory. But first off, it's gonna feel weird. But check it out. It's a ton of fun to drive, again, especially for a modern EV, like that. One of the few sedan EVs you can actually buy that isn't a Tesla. So, what's not to love about that? Great car, but I think the M340i is going to be your winner personally.
Wow. Okay, that is very sophisticated breakdown and pretty nuanced the way you went over all the different things here. So I have driven most of these. The one I do feel very comfortable leading in on and sort of vouching for is, as you hinted at, the Polestar 2. I was in it, and actually, this is hilarious. The center console has this like weird little like hangover thing, and it smashed my phone and shattered it. I still haven't fixed it. So that's one thing to look out for. I don't know if they fixed it. That's a really bad design. Otherwise, you mentioned as an architect, you will really like the Polestar 2. I found it clean. It's everything in some ways that I think Volvo could be, only they've evolved into almost like a higher version of it here with Polestar. It's really fun to drive electric car. The interior, again, is very minimalist. It's a pretty good deal. If you look at the ranges right now, you can get a long-range single motor that starts at just under 50. If you want to do the dual motor, that's 55. And then if you want to really spend some money, which this might help with your trips across Florida, that's 63 for the long-range dual motor with a performance pack. You probably don't necessarily need that, though. So as I look at this list, that's kind of where I would land. I feel like if you want to do something like a little more traditional, what Byron says is what you should do. That's the logical, you still want to have like a performance car with your ice, if you will, have some ice. There you go. But if you want to go electric and you're thinking about it, I kind of like the idea of a Polestar 2. It's really solid. I drove the Polestar 1, which was sort of their Halo hybrid they put out there to make everybody say, hey, look at us, we're a cool brand. I can't wait to drive the 3, which is the crossover, which frankly, it sounds like you're more sedan leading here. You might want to hang out and see what that looks like. It's actually, pictures are out there, but you might want to, if you're looking for something that's like a little more spacious and practical, that could be an interesting option. I've been impressed with what Polestar's done in a short period of time. I really have. So, like you, I talk about design for half the podcast, which I realize for some people are probably like, okay, Greg, this is an audio format. We can look at the pictures. That's a long-winded way of saying I noticed the little touches cars like the Polestar 2 have. So I wouldn't say it's a slam dunk, do that one, but I would say look into it more. And I think you'll, you might find it rewarding. And then it could be like maybe a 2-horse kind of race with that and the 340, drive it back to back, see which one you like, and then figure out where you're at. Is this the moment you want to go EV? Okay. If it's not, well, there you go. Byron lays out what kind of your last muscle car could be. So, all right. That is Spend My Money. Do you have any summer beer plans, Byron? Last night you were drinking an IPA during the reveal of the Land Cruiser. It's August. We're like weeks away from the fall beers. Probably Oktoberfest is already on the shelves.
Yeah, I'm going to be looking for Oktoberfest this weekend, actually. I get excited for it every year. And it's the boring, like, Sam Adams Oktoberfest that I want to. That's the beer when it hits the shelf, I'm like, okay, fall is coming. It's going to be, as growing up on the East Coast, hot, sticky, sweaty summers, I was always ready for fall. And you kind of get fall all summer in Michigan compared to what I'm used to. So, like, I love it here. But it's still that like, it's the football is coming, like it's the hockey is coming. It's that beer for me. And in fact, when I was at my local establishment just the other day, I saw some of the other Oktoberfest stuff is starting to creep onto shelves. So yeah. Fingers crossed for the weekend. We're in August. It's time.
All right. Sounds good. I am holding out for a few more weeks of just some summer ales, things like that, some wheats. But like you, fall's my favorite season. With the air quality, the heat, I'm about ready for fall. It's been a hot, kind of sticky summer here. So yeah, I think I'm ready for what's next. If you enjoy the show, that's 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get the Autoblog podcasts. Please send us your Spend My Monies. That's podcast@autoblog.com. Be safe out there. We'll see you next week.